Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Paul Gleeson. I'm the Ambassador of Ireland to Chile, Peru and Ecuador, and we're delighted to have you with us today for our series focusing on particularly interesting Ireland-Chile research collaborations. We're producing these videos in support of the Irish government Creating Our Future campaign, which is seeking to promote a national and international conversation on research in Ireland, and which is looking for ideas in this regard before the end of November. You can find out more at www.creatingourfuture.ie. We're looking today at the fascinating area of brain health, and I'm delighted that we're able to welcome three guests who are at the absolute cutting edge of this international research. Ian Robertson is Professor Emeritus of Psychology at Trinity College Dublin and co-director of the Global Brain Health Institute, which is a Trinity College collaboration with the University of California, San Francisco, dedicated to protecting the world's aging populations from threats to brain health. Ian has worked or studied at each of Cambridge University, Edinburgh University, Glasgow University, and King's College London. We're also joined by Brian Lawlor, Professor of Old Age Psychiatry at Trinity College Dublin and Deputy Executive Director of the Global Brain Health Institute. Brian is a former winner of the Solomon Silver Excellence in Research Award and the Trinity College Global Engagement Award. And finally, representing Chile in these exciting collaborations, we're joined also by Dr. Agustín Ibáñez, the Director of the Latin America Brain Health Institute, and based here in Santiago at the Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, where he has been directing collaboration with Trinity College and the Global Brain Health Institute. All of our guests here today are experts in their field of research, have appeared on international media many times to discuss their work, and we're delighted you've been able to make time for us today. So Ian, if I might start with you firstly, where did the idea of a Global Brain Health Institute come from? And why was it so important to build in that idea of international collaboration from the outset?
Thank you, Paul. So the idea came from work that had been done in Trinity by Professor Brian Lawlor, myself and others, showing the human brain is plastic and can be changed by the environments and the experiences it has. And we realized that to deal with the problem of dementia, which is going to swamp countries, particularly certain low and middle income countries because of the demographics, we'd have to develop preventative programs to try and maintain brain health, to try and stave off and prevent dementia because there are no current treatments for it, effective treatments. But on top of that, brain health is a value in itself because it fosters creativity, it fosters well-being, and it helps economies and social systems as well. And so this then intersected with the Atlantic Institute. The great Chuck Feeney, the Irish-American philanthropist, made his final big award of giving away all his billions of money to create a series of programs across the globe aimed at reducing inequities of health, of economic inequities, and also racial inequities. And the biggest of the programs is the Global Brain Health Institute, which became the only and the leading leadership fellowship training program to train leaders in fostering brain health across the globe. And because poor brain health is both a source of inequality as well as a result of inequality, we call that the double whammy, it makes no sense to do this in a single country. And what we need to do is to work with colleagues like Professor Ibáñez and others as part of this global brain health network to come up with innovative, policy-ready, scalable solutions that can affect the health and well-being of tens of millions of people, not just a handful of people. So that's the origins of this.
Okay, and I mean, thinking of that, the international dimension beyond your kind of immediate work and sport, Brian, can I come to you on that? Like, I mean, you've worked for over 30 years on developing services and delivering care to people with dementia and looking at best practice in this area. How important has collaboration and research with people working in other countries been in how your mindset and approach has evolved over that period?
Well, just to go back, I mean, over the last 30 years, I mean, I'm a clinician primarily. I've been caring for people with dementia, working with people with dementia and their caregivers. And I guess, as Ian was saying, there's been, I guess, a sense of tragedy out there about dementia, you know, that there wasn't a whole lot that we could do, that there wasn't a lot of hope for people with dementia. And I guess because the field has moved on now in terms of our knowledge about the biology of the disease and when it begins, yeah, we now know that the disease, Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, that begin more in midlife. And there's a window of opportunity. There's things that we may be able to do in order to prevent Alzheimer's disease. So we don't have preventive treatments right now, but there are things that we can do to potentially prevent Alzheimer's disease. So we know that there are modifiable risk factors now, and that if we reduce these modifiable risk factors, there's a real potential to prevent dementia, to prevent Alzheimer's disease. So there's a much more hopeful narrative around dementia now. And some of the work that has been happening in this area in terms of looking at reducing modifiable risk factors has happened not just in Europe, but also is now happening right across the world. So there's a series of studies called the FINGER studies, which is looking at addressing modifiable risk factors and showing that there is potential to slow cognitive decline and potentially decrease the risk of dementia. This is happening in Europe, happening in Latin America. So we really need to look at the big picture here. As Ian was saying, that dementia is a problem worldwide, but low and middle income countries are disproportionately affected. So we really do need to look at reducing risk, not in just the global north, but we need to look at this globally. So collaboration is hugely important. So I think we can learn an awful lot, I think, from working collaboratively. And so I believe that many of the innovations that are going to happen over the next 20 years may not necessarily come from the global north. They will come from collaborations between the north and the south, and potentially coming from findings and studies in low and middle income countries that would actually inform how we should be changing our approaches to dementia here in Europe.
And Agustín, coming to you on that, as someone outside the global north, working here, leading so much of this in South America and indeed across all of Latin America, I'm interested in how these first links with research teams at Trinity College were established, and I suppose what influence the Global Brain Health Institute has had on the evolution and direction of travel of the Latin America Brain Health Institute that you lead as well.
Yes, thank you, Paul. So I want to briefly highlight, I was a neuroscientist trying to understand cognitive process in the lab, you know, like empathy, theory of mind, decision-making, cognition in general, and in patients with dementia. But then I began to travel across Latin America, Europe, US, and I realized a big challenge that happened in Latin America regarding, you know, training, infrastructure, funding, connections with other parts of the world. I realized that most of the countries in the region share the same barriers. And then when I joined the GBHI program as an Atlantic Fellow, it's a completely life change process, completely transformed what I want to do. I realized that you can make huge, big steps if you dream big and you thinking that what are the common problems and solutions for dealing not only with people with dementia and their families, but also with research and clinicians. So I first applied as an Atlantic Fellow, and we developed a huge project called Multi-Partner Consortium to expand dementia research in Latin America, or BrainLat, that it's aimed to understand the interweaving between genetics from one side, that in Latin America we have a mixture of African, native, and European ancestors. So this creates different conditions for genetic vulnerability. But on our side, as Jan and Brian mentioned, they are huge determinants of dementia that are social, that are depending of social determinants of health, socioeconomic factors, and how those processes interact is not very well understood, especially in underrepresented populations like Chile and Latin America in the global perspective. We want to fight in dementia at global level, but we have to understand the local interaction between environmental, genetic, and neurocognitive factors. But then I also realized that by doing research, you can also transform other realities, especially, you know, when you consider capacity buildings or implementation science to empowering research groups, to create training, to create networking, also to help families, to help, you know, with genetic counseling, to support poor families that don't have governmental support across Latin America. And because of that, we begin to moving towards the Latin American and Caribbean Consortium on Dementia that we coordinate with Mario Pasha, another researcher and also friend of the GBHI, that we want to do is empowering the teams, the clinicians and researchers. And then with these two strong collaboration that were boosted by the GBHI, we were able to convince the authorities of Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez to create the Latin American Brain Health Institute, or BrainLat. Sorry for the similar names, it's the lack of creativity from my side. And this is an institute that is affiliated, associated with the Global Brain Health Institute, and we want to learn three things from the GBHI. First of all, we will create an educational program. We will create a fellowship inspired by the Atlantic Fellowship Program, where emerging leaders from Chile and other regions will receive holistic training from research to clinical to policymakers, orientation to become leaders. We will also develop a strong research collaboration. We already have several pathways for collaborating with Trinity College, and we are expanding our collaborations with Latin American centers. And then networking. We want to connect the South, you know, and the Latin American South with Ireland, Europe, and US. So we are extremely excited. We just begin this year, but so many projects are already ongoing. So I think that we have a really important compromise to commitment, sorry, for connecting the South with the North.
I mean, it's such a fascinating and rich agenda. And I mean, if all of that wasn't enough, Agustín, and maybe turning to you on this one, Ian, you know, if there wasn't already enough, then I mean, the huge focus on brain health as a result of COVID-19 and long COVID, especially, Ian, that has, I suppose, created a renewed focus on brain health. And I mean, it feels like, you know, with the great vaccination success that we've had in both Chile and in Ireland, that, you know, we're hopefully past the stage in the pandemic of intensive care units being overwhelmed and so forth. But it feels, and maybe I'm wrong at this, that we're really only at the beginning when it comes to looking at the brain health and mental health aspects flowing from the pandemic. So I just wanted to get your sense of that, Ian. Is that a fair characterization, or is it inaccurate, or how do you anticipate the pandemic changing the landscape for the type of work that the Global Brain Health Institute is doing?
Yeah, no, Paul, you're absolutely, excuse me, you're absolutely right. I think COVID was a terrible thing for so many millions of people, and all the poor people have died. And there might be one small piece of silver lining in it, which is it makes people more aware of this phenomenon of the value of their brain and the incredible importance of the health of their brains. And yes, COVID, both the stress and the isolation, the unemployment, but also the biological effects of COVID on the brain, have produced a kind of constellation of problems in many millions of people, where you're getting a combination of emotional and cognitive problems. And I think the value of brain health as a concept is that it does allow us to bring together many of the threats to the human brain, including what are conventionally called mental health problems, but also problems of dementia, of neurodegeneration, of aging. And I think the value of COVID may be, I hope, that we really start to see brain health as a value to which people can aspire and the building of which will create all sorts of benefits, not just in health, not just in well-being and mental health, but also in economic and social well-being as well. And when you do that, what brain health allows us to do, it brings people together who might have otherwise been in silos, and realizing just that everything flows from the human brain. I mean, everything, political conflict, economic development, creativity, everything flows from the human brain. And therefore the health of the human brain is absolutely central. It's absolutely central to every government department, everything that people do. And so that could be the silver lining of COVID.
And Brian, just coming to you on that public awareness point that Ian raises there. I just watched in recent days the movie The Father, about an older man in his 80s living with dementia. I thought it was a remarkable movie, an incredible acting performance by Anthony Hopkins. But I was thinking how it must be to watch that movie if you are living with dementia or living with someone who's living with dementia. And similarly, even in the UK at the moment, to pick another aspect of popular culture, you know, a huge amount of focus on footballers from the 1960s and 1970s and the effects of dementia decades later. And we see it with the England team from the 1966 World Cup and so on. You know, has public consciousness of the risks and maybe rewards from good behavior too, has that notably changed the landscape that you and your colleagues internationally are navigating in dementia or similar areas?
As I was saying earlier, there's still a kind of a tragedy narrative around dementia, and people are very, very fearful about dementia. I mean, people over the age of 50 fear dementia more than stroke or cancer. So there's a lot of fear out there. And that's one of the things that the Global Brain Health Institute is trying to do through our research, through our advocacy, through our training and education, is to change that narrative and change that narrative globally to a more positive or hopeful story about dementia. And I think being able to address modifiable risk factors is very, very important part of that. You know, that there are things that you can do to reduce risk of developing dementia. And in terms of awareness, the awareness is there that about dementia. There's a lot of awareness that there's no treatment in terms of curative treatment. There aren't that many people that are out there in the general public that are aware enough about modifiable risk factors. So we need to do a lot of training and education in that area. You mentioned about the footballers, rugby players, American footballers, and CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Again, huge fear in those sporting populations about the potential danger of traumatic brain injury or concussion, repetitive head trauma in terms of risk of dementia. But among those groups of people, there isn't a whole lot of awareness about the modifiable risk factors, things that you can do. So yes, a traumatic, concussion is not good for the brain. There is a potential risk of developing dementia later in life, but there are other modifiable risk factors that you can pay attention to in midlife or before that actually could potentially reduce your risk of developing dementia. So people, they see that they have the fear aspect, but they don't have the hopeful or positive aspect about brain health and things that you can do to protect your brain, to promote connections. It's just interesting in terms of the story around COVID. I mean, one of the areas of interest for us is around loneliness and isolation, which is a risk factor for poor brain health and for dementia. And really what we've seen in COVID was this very dramatic social restriction, huge increase in loneliness experienced by lots of people, particularly young people. And this loneliness having a very, very negative effect on their mental health, increasing depression and so on and so forth. So I think one of the things on a negative side is that there are potential knock-on effects, at a generational level, in terms of time out of school for young kids, in terms of potential brain health effects, loneliness, isolation, depression. So we really now need to think about what we can do to boost brain health and promote brain health post-COVID, so people can catch up, so there isn't that deficit. So now more than ever, I think COVID has shone a spotlight on really what we need to do to promote and protect brain health, to change the narrative not about the negative things that can happen to your brain, but all the positive things that you can do to protect your brain, to promote your brain health, to grow connections. So I think that's a lot of work that we're going to have to do here in GBHI, and that's a global effort. And just finally, just say one of the projects that we're involved in Trinity, it's an international project, but we are linking into Chile as well as a project called CLIck, where we're looking at loneliness and isolation in times of COVID, and particularly in the caregivers, particularly caregivers of people with dementia. This is an international collaboration, but there's cross-national collaboration between Ireland, Trinity, and looking at caregivers of people with dementia in Chile and their experience of loneliness during COVID. So we think there are some very, very interesting findings from that, but with a very nice cross-national comparison between our two countries. It'd be interesting to see whether things are very different or very much the same. I suspect that there will be more similarities than differences between our two countries in that regard.
That's a fascinating piece of work. We'll be watching that with interest for sure. I mean, I'm very conscious here. It's been quite a strict lockdown in Chile, and you know, for long periods, people not able to leave their houses, and for people with big gardens and so on, that's one thing. But for people living on their own in small apartments, it's a very, very hard time. And as you say, it's great that there's so much work being done to study the effects of this now and look at what lessons we can learn. Agustín, just coming to you, I mean, talking and thinking of Chile, I know as we record this, I think you're due to travel to Ireland tomorrow, which is terrific. But thinking of Chile and Ireland, we're partner countries at the OECD. We're sharing lessons all the time in a whole range of different policy areas. Are there lessons, do you think, from Ireland or other EU partners that you'd like to see applied in Chile in this area? Or in the same way, you know, are there things that have gone well in Chile or in other countries in Latin America that you think lessons could be learned there in Europe as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think that is a huge opportunity for finding common dots of collaboration, common dots of research, but also understanding something that pandemics have shown, you know, that we live in a global world, but we don't know how to deal with that global world. So I think this applies also to dementia, not only to dementia research, to dementia caregivers. And it's a huge opportunity, especially because across Chile, but across Latin America, we don't understand the interactions between genetics, between environmental factors, inequalities. And we want to know if the standard thing that we think for Ireland, Europe, or US applies to Latin America and at each degree. So first of all, it's a great opportunity for that, but also in Chile in particular, but in the region, I would say, we don't have a kind of training for networking. We don't work like in Europe, you know, that all the countries collaborate with each other. So we have to create a culture of stronger collaboration, of fair collaboration, based in the respect and in the trust in the other. So we are working hard on that. And I think that GBHI is the best departing point because they are supporting you know, the research across the world and clinicians across the world. And this is a unique opportunity. I never have been so much enthusiasm between different groups in Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, which are countries that already do research and collaborations with our network. And I think that we can learn from Trinity, as you know, being a relatively small place, but extremely global and open to so many perspectives. And I think that we can learn a lot. And I hope that we can bring a lot of diversity in research and in collaborations.
Thank you, Agustín. Ian, Agustín spoke earlier about being an Atlantic Fellow, and I wanted to ask you just to say a word about the Atlantic Fellows and the Atlantic Institute and why that's such an integral part of this.
Yes, well, the Atlantic Institute and 8 associated programs across the globe of which the Global Brain Health Institute is one, was the last great spend down of the great Chuck Feeney, the Irish-American philanthropist, who started the Giving While Living pledge, essentially, by giving away all his money. And he wanted to, his famous phrase is, it's all about people. Mm-hmm. That's what he says. Whenever you want to do something, it's all about the people. So he has given this almost $1 billion to set up these programs aimed at reducing social health, economic, and racial inequities. And these 1 year, usually 1 year, it varies from program to program, fellowships train amazing leaders from across the world, like Agustín, who then come and develop programs. In our case, what we regard as the central and most important issue underpinning inequities, which is brain health. And so the Atlantic Institute has now trained several. Global Brain Health Institute has trained over 150 fellows. After 5 years, we will have trained hopefully thousands by the end of 20 years' time, because we will have affiliate programs across the world, like the one in Chile. And we're the other programs in Australia, South Africa, the USA will be also tackling inequity from different perspectives, but we're all working together to train leaders committed to a values-based tackling of inequities in the world, in our case, inequities of the brain.
Thank you. Ian, I've one final question that I might come to each of you on just before we finish, and it's this. I mean, the Creating Our Future campaign that I mentioned earlier is aiming to identify, with the help of the public at home and our diaspora around the world, ideas for the future of Irish research. Brian, maybe I'll come to you first, actually, on this one. If you could give one piece of advice to government policymakers in the country in which you're working, so for you in Ireland, what would that be? If you could give one piece of advice to the senior civil servants working on research policy in Ireland, what would it be?
Well, what I would say, and what I've learned, I think, over the last 30 years is, don't work in a silo. And I think that many of us work in professional silos when it comes to tackling, health or social care issues. So just give an example, when I was in medical school, I learned very, very little about social determinants of health, or the importance of a social history, learning and understanding about the person's social connection. We now know that social connection is a huge determinant of health, both brain health and physical health. I didn't learn that at medical school. Things were siloed. So what the big idea about GBHI is brings together different professionals, sharing ideas. Ian mentioned about creativity. I mean, creativity is such an important part of brain health, and having artists, architects, engineers working with doctors, scientists, it broadens the perspective. It changes the whole landscape in terms of what you can do. And I think still, when we approach problems from a science and a research point of view, we are still working primarily in silos. GBHI is trying to change all that when we apply it to brain health, bringing people with different perspectives. And that really, when you bring that diversity to the table, there's a much better chance that you're going to solve the problem in a holistic way. So that would be my advice. And I would have the policymaker in with me in GBHI as well, of course, because that's we can't have policy people and people in the government working outside us. They have to be in the tent, not outside the tent. So break down these silos, work together. Diversity is the way forward. And that's really what we try to do at GBHI.
Agustín, can I come to you with that same question? If you had one piece of advice for senior officials working on research policy in Chile, what would it be?
That will be look to the whole horizon and try to find a common horizon, and use that you have learned. As a scientist, we have so much to offer to policymakers, to developing intervention programs, to working with the different sectors to improve brain health, and learning that all that you know about brains it doesn't depend on the brain. You know, it's the education, the social factors, the interaction that build a resilient brain. So we need to find in this common horizon.
And Ian, final word on that?
I'll follow on both Brian and Agustín there. We need people from the government departments of education, of health, of employment, of political affairs, to realize that the common factor in all of these things is the functioning of the brain. And if we want to build the kinds of societies that are going to cope with things like technological changes, artificial intelligence, climate change, there is nothing as important as the quality of the brains of the people in the country. And therefore, it's to do with getting out the silos politically and administratively as well as scientifically.
It's good advice. Listen, thank you all so much for your time. It's an absolutely fascinating area. It's so broad, as Ian said, but I'm grateful to you for opening a window into it for us lay people without the expert knowledge. My sister-in-law works in a company in the US that develops rockets that travel into space, and I always say to her, I'm jealous that she can say to people, well, it's hardly rocket science, when they're boring her about some other topic. And in a similar fashion, I think all of you are out on your own and being able to say to people, well, it's hardly brain health. But it's to let us see some of that expertise and to hear it from you today. That's really fascinating in the light of everything we're dealing with, and as Ian said, so many aspects that touch each of our lives. So thank you for making the time for this today and letting us see a little bit of a very exciting Ireland-Chile research collaboration. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.